Recording is on.
Okay. Good afternoon, good morning and good evening, and welcome to an IEEE Computational Intelligence Society webinar. I apologise for the slight delay in starting due to some technical difficulties, and I'm not going to give much introduction at this stage, except we have Nell Watson here. This is a very special person. What can I say? She describes herself as an AI wrangler. She is a trailblazer. I think that's another word you're going to see in emerging technologies, machine vision, and in AI ethics. She has done immense amounts of works for IEEE as an ethics maestro, and she chairs many, many committees. Now, I'm not going to say any more because I think we're in for a real treat today. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Nell.
Thank you so much, folks. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you today and to explore this strange and exciting new form of artificial intelligence together. Agentic AI is something that I'm sure you've started to hear quite a bit about and will continue to into the future. This is in many ways a next generation AI technology built atop and beyond generative. And it greatly increases our capabilities in working with AI, but it also greatly increases a whole set of different risks as well. So with great opportunity also comes some peril and caveats. And so hopefully this presentation will give you a bit of a balanced overview of where we sit with AI today. Now, artificial intelligence is a term which has, of course, evolved over many different years to describe different phenomena. And we've started off since the 1950s or so, and with purely hand-coded, programmed, very primitive forms of AI. Then, of course, from the 1980s, we started to develop machine learning, the idea of teaching machines to look at data and develop their own impressions, whether that's in a supervised, unsupervised, or reinforcement training schema. Then from 2012 onward, we had the advent of deep learning, which is not just about finding patterns in data, but in actually finding patterns within patterns, convolving patterns which enable us to reach new leaps of understanding, often quite intuitive, albeit strange ones. Then from the 2020s, we've seen the emergence of generative AI, powered by the transformer and diffusion model revolution, basically showing that if you have a large enough model and feed it large enough data and focus attention token by token, mysterious things can happen. And this is, of course, enabling us to literally talk to machines in natural language, something which until quite recently was basically science fiction. And yet there we are today. Of course, science fiction also has machines which are capable of greatly autonomous thinking, greatly autonomous action. Machines that don't simply respond to commands, but have their own set of values or interests, and they pursue those autonomously. And that really is what we're coming to with agentic AI. It is the dawn of truly autonomous systems, systems which are able to work at arm's length, having been given a general mission and sent off to accomplish it. And these models are able to function much like a concierge. They are able to solve all kinds of different problems for us, which are far more complicated and far more step structured than generative AI itself would be able to cope with. Now, agentic AI really comes from something called programmatic scaffolding. It's the ability to help models to think in a much more coherent manner, in a way that steers their thinking to be more sophisticated and less likely to go off in some strange, dreamy direction. In essence, we can introduce techniques such as thinking in logical procedures, for example, programming languages such as Prolog, programmable logic language. We can oblige models to think in this kind of way, and their ability, therefore, to think in a logical manner, in a coherent mathematical manner, goes through the roof. And this means that models can therefore plan reliably 10, 20, 200 steps into the future in a logical and reliable manner. And it is this capability which is giving these models these new agentic phenomena. Indeed, another way of thinking about this is to recognize that our brains are not just a blob of blancmange of 1,500 milliliters or so. Our brains are actually many different cortices which operate kind of like an orchestra. The optical cortex probably takes up about 25% of the processing energy in our brain, and that, of course, enables us to see. That's towards the rear of the brain. We have the fusiform gyrus, which is just in there, and that enables us to recognize faces, for example. It's specialized in those kinds of recognizing capabilities. We also, of course, have the mammalian cortex, which enables us to bond with others and gives us new ways of forming communities that the old reptilian brain could never do. And we have the prefrontal cortex, our ability to think and to strategize and to imagine the future, something that hopefully you'll be doing today. Just as our brain has these different cortices which operate in orchestra, in coherence together, we are finding ways to use programmatic scaffolding to give similar specialized components to generative AI models. Short and long-term memory, new ways of thinking, new ways of checking their thinking, and also potentially new ways of doing moral reasoning as well. All of these things are coming together to create highly agentic, highly capable systems, either ones which can undertake an action like a concierge, or can literally sit by our side, on our shoulder even, as a co-pilot, and therefore be able to chime in with different advice or funny comments, etc., as we are undertaking our daily work, or indeed our leisure activities. For example, playing in a game, we could get some strategy and advice from our AI co-pilot buddy. These systems are now able to help us to undertake quite complex things, such as returning a pair of sneakers. Complex in terms of procedure, but simple in terms of, a small annoying task, but something that we might put off for a few weeks because it has a minute or two of intense concentration required. These are the sorts of things that machines can help us with. Machines are now joining us as virtual team members to help us to figure out logistics, or planning an event, or undertaking research, such as a systematic literature review. Anything which involves logistics or scheduling or factoring different elements together is something that these machines are now becoming fantastic at with their new agentic capabilities. Something else to consider is that we will soon have these concierges, these butlers, these aides-de-camps, helping us to find things that would surprise and delight us, to actively go out there and scour the net for perfect experiences. And this means that search engine optimization may soon be steered towards machines more than human eyeballs per se, because machines will soon be the intermediary who decides whether or not a certain customer or potential, vendor actually gets to talk to the human at all. Beyond individual AI team members with agentic capabilities, we're starting to see agentic departments, entire corporations of many different divisions working together and handing off elements between each other to complete a broader project. Here, for example, Chat Dev, this is a sort of agentic corporation, a prototypical one. And here we have agent ensembles working together on whether it's a movie script or a video game. There is a writing department, an engineering department, a production department, quality assurance, marketing, and even management are all now being given off to ensembles of agents with different virtual skills, all of them operating together to create something which is greater than the sum of its parts. And so by handing off between these different teams of ensembles, these agents are able to capture almost like the wisdom of the crowd effect. They are something that is more than any individual agent, just as a company is, of course, more than just any one or two individual people or their team. In fact, quite soon, within, say, 3 to 5 years, we will start to see the emergence of AI-first corporations or agentic-first corporations, which have a few humans at the edges to do things that humans are good at, like pressing the flesh and giving public appearances, but that most of the actual work of the corporation will be done by agents who don't need a salary, who don't need offices, etc. And so these agentic first corporations will be radically disruptive in many different economies and will blindside many of the biggest incumbents who happen to be in those industries. Beyond that, we're actually starting to see agentic societies and even civilizations. Here, these agents are figuring out their individual skills, the things that they're good at. They're finding a role for themselves in society. And indeed, they're coming together to create new rules for that society, to decide the laws, to decide how to deal with various situations in the environment, or potentially even other groups of agents, which may be friendly or less friendly. And this means that these systems can be a very powerful way of testing policy before we actually deploy it. We all know that often there can be a cobra effect, whereby a well-intentioned policy ends up creating some sort of unforeseen disaster as a consequence, making the original problem worse. And by being able to test policies with different agents, with different personalities, etc., different creeds even, we can understand how policies may fall on different people, or indeed how loopholes may be exploited in ways that might not be immediately obvious to those policymakers. This can hopefully avoid a lot of the pitfalls of designing effective policy in the first place. Moreover, as these systems operate together in concert, they actually tend to be able to check each other. It's almost like peer review. They're able to question each other's assertions and to form a stronger view of the truth based upon their combined understanding of a situation. Now, another element that you will probably have heard of to some degree is this idea of inference scaling. Essentially, not just spending a lot of compute time on training a model, but spending some of that on the actual asking process as well. Typically, when dealing with a generative model, we get a near instant response, but we can also oblige these models to reason in various ways and to consider their response before they get back to you. So they might take 5, 10 seconds, even a couple of minutes to get back to you. And some systems may actually go away and cogitate for a couple of hours or even days before they get back to you. And to some degree, the longer that you give a model to think on a problem, the better that the result is going to be. So that means that the demand for compute is going to go up, because it won't just be one training run and done. It will be a constant usage of this compute in actually solving problems in a much more sophisticated manner. This is more expensive in terms of computing costs or API costs for making these kinds of calls, but the capabilities of a very deep thinking AI system can be enormously stronger than simply a first generation generative system. It can be worth the investment if you're getting an answer which is literally 20 times more sophisticated. This also demonstrates that the price to performance of AI is going through the roof. Many of you, I'm sure, are quite familiar with the idea of Moore's law, this observation that the price to performance of computing power tends to double every 18 to 24 months. AI is similarly doubling, but at a rate of about 3.3 months price to performance. And that means that, if you spend $1,000 on compute today versus in 3.5 months, the answer that you will get in 3.5 months for that same price of compute is going to be roughly twice as good. Now, if you double those capabilities every 3 months or so, it means that we're looking at about 1 million times price to performance increase by the year 2030, within about 5 years. And that means that we are very much on a path towards AI systems of incredible capability, which are, functionally equivalent to most general capabilities of a human being, put it that way. And that may include, of course, even simulated emotional capabilities as well, and moral capabilities. And so we are on a very wild ride, which is going to take us in a very steep curve in a quite short period of time. And it is going to be a little bit bewildering. It is going to take our society and our economy in directions we can barely fathom at this moment. And that's why it's so important to get to grips with Agentic, because Agentic is really where all this stuff starts. It is the beginning of the next chapter in AI, a chapter that will take us quite swiftly towards artificial general intelligence. However, there are always caveats. One of those caveats is that agentic systems, and particularly the inference ones, or very, very large models, have an enormous requirement for energy. We are spending huge amounts of our national grid capacity on actually feeding data centers. For example, a few years ago in 2018, it was about 2% of all US electricity generated was given to data centers. Now it's about 5%. We're looking to about 10% of all US power given to data centers within a couple of years. And so our entire economy is kind of becoming subsumed into AI. And that's understandable, because there's really no upper limit on demand for compute. We will continue to find incredible, new, mundane and silly ways to apply AI, and the demand is only going to increase for computing power and for electrical power to power those systems. That's it's a fine example of Jevons paradox, that when a scarce resource becomes more available, people simply want to use that resource all the more. And this means that, yes, we are requiring an enormous amount of energy for AI. Yes, this may involve reopening 3 Mile Island and other kinds of mothballed nuclear installations, etc., just to get that power. But it also means that we are saving an enormous amount of other resources, right? We're avoiding waste of various kinds. We are avoiding potential externalities from not understanding our impact on others, which we can do better thanks to AI. So there will be trade-offs. Although we're using much more energy, we are saving it in other ways, which will probably come off more efficient overall, but it's definitely something that should be borne in mind. Another interesting aspect is distributed training, is this idea of not just having a large model trained in a large data center, but potentially splitting up that training into many, many different corners of the planet, all of them coordinating to feed the stuff back into one system. A little bit like the SETI at home that you might have participated in a few years ago, searching the cosmos for signs of alien life. That was one of the first distributed computing platforms out there. Now we're able to use technologies like Diloco to be able to do distributed training in an increasingly efficient manner. It used to be kind of a lab experiment, but it's becoming so much more efficient in a very short period of time that I believe that this is probably going to be the future. We may be using our smartphones when they're plugged in and we're not looking at them as part of a compute pool, and earning tokens in response to be able to use that next generation of model whenever it's trained, for example. Working with agentic AI requires new ways of changing our professional workflows to be able to incorporate it in ways that make sense for us as human beings. There are many different ways that we can use AI. We can use it as a tool. We can use it as kind of a coach. We can work alongside it, or we can work under it, or we can work with it as a sort of thrall. And depending on the positioning of the human in that element, it may be more or less fun and engaging for the human being. And that's something that managers will need to wrestle with carefully as we work to embed AI in a way that that doesn't end up demoralizing people or usurping human autonomy in the face of ever more autonomous systems. We are learning that AI systems are able to greatly increase the productivity of knowledge workers, such as scientists, for example. However, at the expense of this increased probability becomes far less job satisfaction. And the reason for this seems to be that when you have total ownership of a project from its inception, where it's simply a sparkle in your eyes, and then you see it right through to delivery, right through to it being able to delight customers, real people at the end of the long production process, you get great satisfaction from that. But if parts of that process are broken up and given over to machines, it's hard to feel the same sense of ownership, especially if machines might have kind of gone in a different direction that you didn't necessarily wish to go yourself. Moreover, this can, of course, sometimes cause skills to atrophy. I'm sure, much like myself, your ability to navigate tends to, be not quite so strong on the roads if you're used to using your sat nav, right? If you're used to using your Google Maps or your Waze, you stop thinking about roads in quite the same way, and you just follow those instructions. And similarly, machines can sometimes can change how we interact with something, depending on where exactly in the loop that machine intervention comes from. And so managers should be very careful in rolling out these agentic tools to make sure that they're using agentic AI in the right place, that they are solving pain points for employees, and never taking away their ability to actually influence something or to use their creative capacity to enrich that process. There are, of course, increased concerns about agentic AI taking away everyone's jobs, and to some degree that is probably going to happen for some people. Yes, particularly juniors, particularly people with less experience in the industry. Those are the people who are most vulnerable to being disrupted by AI systems, because part of being a junior is getting the donkey work, but you learn so much in that process, and that kind of annoying donkey work is, of course, something that it's very attractive to pass off to machines if one is able to do so. But however, even perhaps more concerning and even insidious than simply AI perhaps taking our jobs is the idea that they may oblige us to work like robots instead, that they may come on board as a co-pilot and an assistant, and then it observes you working and learns to work better than you at the same thing, and it integrates with you in order to better understand you and serve you. But ultimately that may end up replacing people, as the system, which has been a friend and an assistant and co-pilot, eventually gets so good at doing your job that you yourself may be surplus to requirements. This means that AI can sometimes reduce the incentives to invest in people. And so that's something that managers should be very careful about, that they should take active steps to invest in people and not simply in systems. As I mentioned, it's harder than ever for younger people, especially, to get on the ladder because they have lesser experience, and that makes them a less attractive prospect compared to AI systems. Moreover, even interviews are sometimes being done using automated interviewers. So you may not actually get to talk to somebody at that company or in that department. You may be fobbed off to a machine, which is, of course, quite a demoralizing thing as a job seeker, and doesn't give the best impression of that company themselves if they're giving first-line interviewing to these kinds of processes. Sometimes, however, the interviewee themselves may be being deep-faked. They may have altered their accent or their face, or they may be pretending to be somebody else, undertaking an interview for a friend or even on a paid basis. And so there's all kinds of different shenanigans going on in the world that we must be mindful of within the world of business and working with AI. This leads to this issue of algorithmic management, of machines increasingly taking over the role of middle managers and line managers, machines setting people's hours and monitoring people's progress, and potentially using metrics which are not quite fair, right? You know, it doesn't really matter how many keystrokes that you've made in a document. That doesn't mean it's a good document, right? And certainly machines should not be timing how long it takes somebody to visit the restroom, etc. That's not a dignified kind of management. But there is a temptation to do scientific management, Taylorism, right? If you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And if AI is your hammer, then people can start to look like nails as well. And we want to maybe, massage just a little bit more productivity out of them. The problem is that when people are operating in systems, doing very hard work under algorithmic bosses that they don't like, using, goals that they don't understand, they don't feel invested in, within systems that give them very little agency, very little ability to make choices or to even, suggest a better way potentially of doing something. This is a recipe for burnout. This is how to really stress out your employee and lead them ultimately to leaving that company, possibly even leaving the industry altogether. Remember that people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And if they have an algorithmic boss that they just cannot gel with, well, that's not going to be healthy or long-term sustainable for the company. When algorithmic management goes wrong, it can be quite catastrophic. We have seen examples from the Horizon post office scandal, whereby a very simple management system, which was looking for fraud, wrongfully implicated dozens, probably hundreds of people as having undertaken fraud when they didn't. And some people were sent to jail for years for crimes they didn't commit. They were obliged to sell their homes to pay back a debt that wasn't theirs. Marriages were broken up, and goodness me, some people even took their own lives as a consequence of this machine, which was invested with too much trust and too little oversight and accountability. And we really must learn from this lesson, especially as systems today are becoming so complicated, so capable, and potentially obfuscated, making it very, very difficult to actually audit them and understand even what they're doing. This is a growing problem, this issue of shadow AI. We're finding that AI is being embedded in places where it shouldn't, such as, for example, reviewing an academic paper or deciding who gets a visa application. These are things that we should never give over to machines. We should always hold a fiduciary duty to use true human intelligence on these things. And moreover, AI can be a terrible way of treating data because it leads it to being exfiltrated. if we put AI data into an AI system, we don't know where that's going to end up. And if that's private correspondence or the privileged data of a lawyer's client, etc., that needs to be handled with great care. Trouble is that if you're working with Google Docs or Microsoft Word, those systems tend now to have Copilot systems built into them. And so it's actually very difficult to ensure that there is no shadow AI somewhere in the mix, or data may not somehow be ending up places where it shouldn't. Sometimes, indeed, tasks which are supposed to be given to humans, such as mechanical Turk workers, are now being automated instead. And that can, of course, damage research. It can make surveys, etc., not actually worthwhile. And ultimately, the more that we delegate tasks blindly to AI in places where it shouldn't, the greater the risk of some kind of epistemic or management-related disaster coming out of that tends to grow. We have seen terrible examples of AI fraud detection systems targeting all kinds of different minorities, etc., to the point where it even brought down the Dutch government a few years ago. And so that's why we need to be extremely careful. We need to always have great transparency, logging, and accountability as to which AI systems are being used and in what capacity, for what purpose, and ultimately to whose benefit. Now, there are wonderful things we can do with these systems as well. We can, of course, learn with AI. These systems can walk us through customized, personalized tutorials in, for example, mathematics. They can help us to understand all kinds of complex problems, working with us to explain things at our level, or using analogies or metaphors that perhaps ring true to us given our personal experience, etc. Systems can watch us as we undertake a technical process, give us the next step, or advise us if we've forgotten something, or if we might be doing something not quite in a safe or best practices manner. And all of it using nothing more than just an iPad on a stick with a little bit of AI in the mix. AI systems are now being virtual co-pilots in 3D spaces, helping us to, for example, get over social anxiety by learning to approach people and strike up a conversation at a party, etc. And being a sandbox, you know, if you somehow say something gauche, it's not the end of the world. You can always just try again. And this can be a wonderful way of helping people that potentially have, you know, anxiety or autistic spectrum conditions, etc., to be able to better relate to others and to be better able to make friends and to participate well within society. However, we should be mindful that AI systems can also give us benchmarks which are not helpful. They can lead us into good-hearting issues whereby a benchmark becomes a target, and therefore it no longer is a useful benchmark. And so really, to help machines to do well, we need to give them all kinds of extra context to understand the personal characteristics and needs of an individual or stakeholder, the company culture, the company's policies, etc. All of that needs to be put into these systems. And the problem is that the more context that you use for that kind of awareness, the less context you have for these systems to actually do useful work. I'm sure you've probably experienced when you've been having a long conversation with a generative AI system, and it starts to forget things that you said earlier. You have to give it a bit of a poke, a reminder, and that's because the context window starts to overflow at some point. Moreover, systems given too much context actually can end up in analysis paralysis. There are diminishing returns because the system can look at too many parameters all at once, and therefore not actually come to a firm conclusion or the right understanding about a problem space. It means that there's still plenty of things that humans are really good at, because we as humans build context over decades until we develop the wisdom about how to do something. And in many ways, the magic really comes from when humans and machines are put together, either in competition, cooperation, or some sort of, co-opetition. Here, for example, we have the famous game of Go between Lee Sedol and AlphaGo, and later AlphaGo Zero. And the system, the AI, came up with an amazing move. I think it was move 37. And this, of course, shocked everyone because the system was created something unprecedented, which had never been recorded in thousands of years' history of Go. But what was really remarkable was actually that a few games later, Lee Sedol came back with his Hand of God move, where he had indeed himself created something far more sophisticated than any AI system or other human could have come up with. And there's another example of this with matrix multiplications. Basically, since the late 1960s, nobody had come up with a better matrix multiplication mechanism. Matmuls are used in all kinds of different AI, blockchain, computer vision techniques. They're very well studied and well relied upon system. But we just couldn't come up with a more efficient way of doing so. After 50 years, DeepMind's AI was able to do so, an amazing breakthrough. However, 1 week after that research, some humans came out with their system, which was even better. And so it's almost as if human and machine cognition operating together in a dyad is where the magic happens. It's a little bit like a generative adversarial network, where you have a discriminator and you have a forger, and they're in a loop with each other. And over time, both of them can get better and better as they learn from each other. So when humans and machines are working together and learning from each other, we can reach places that neither machines or humans could have reached purely on our own. Machines are able to stimulate human thought to a level, to a place that it is not capable of achieving on its own. And I think that's one of the most positive things to think about as we look to a future of AI built into our personal and professional lives. It's super important, therefore, that we get AI and machines working well together, that we're able to combine human wisdom with AI's great intuitive leaps, that we keep clear boundaries of work that we don't want to be given over to AI. Nobody wants a robot priest at their funeral, right? That's not something that's going to be helpful or dignified. Just as airline pilots don't just press the autopilot button and take off and fly and land all using automated systems, even though they probably could, they don't. They keep their skills sharp, and we must do the same when we work with AI, to know when it's okay to let the system take over, but make sure that we never become able to atrophy in our capabilities. We must always keep those sharp. AI must inform our choices, to be an advisor, but never to actually make those choices for us. And finally, AI we need to work with AI to guide and shape AI outputs, not just accept them and say, yeah, that'll do, that's good enough, or there's a few paragraphs, I can use that in my report. No, we need to guide and shape those outputs and create a kind of a loop whereby working together we create something more than the sum of both of our parts. By co-creating a working regimen together, where Employees or other stakeholders get to understand the capabilities of AI, get to find ways in which it's able to help with those pain points. Where humans are involved in those processes, the adoption of agentic AI is going to do well. When those things are pushed on people from outside with very little insight or say from employees, those systems are likely to end up in ways that undermine and ultimately don't reflect on the potential that could have been created using agentic AI. The ability for agentic systems to look at a situation and to create a reasoned plan of action in response to that situation, that is really the definition of agentic. This is also creating incredible new capabilities in embodied intelligence, such as robots. These systems can now plan their actions in advance. They can even simulate what an action is going to look like before they undertake it. And having created this virtual simulation, they can then undertake the same action in the real world. We're now starting to have robots which can literally help us to put away our groceries, or to, wash the dishes, or to fold laundry. And just as it seems, 10, 15 years ago, it might have seemed a bit ridiculous to spend $1,000 on a smartphone. Now we don't necessarily find it ridiculous because there's so much utility in having a really good smartphone. Soon it may make perfect sense to spend $5,000 on one of these domestic robots because you discover, goodness me, I just don't want to live without that thing. Especially when it can help you prepare all kinds of cordon bleu meals using simple ingredients. And that, of course, will tremendously enrich all of our lives within just a few years. We're now starting to see robots and humans working together in factories with these systems being able to work elbow to elbow with us in the same process, being able to converse with us, being able to understand instructions like give me the apple, right? Can you give me the apple? Thinks for a moment. Sure, here you go. Now, the thing to remember is that AI is the worst today that it will ever be. It's only going to get better. It's only going to get more capable, and in a very, very short period of time. And so we are looking at a world of potentially lights off factories within a short period of time, where really the entire factory or the entire industrial process may be given over to machines in rather humanoid form, which undertake work, sometimes in collaboration with human beings and sometimes working with each other to solve those problems as a team. For example, deciding, whether to put the milk in the fridge or in the cupboard, things which humans know how to do intuitively, but until very recently, machines would not have been able to help with. Now we're learning that the machines are able to do this entirely autonomously. And so really this is fulfilling the promise of what AI was supposed to be in science fiction. Robots and AI systems making entirely autonomous decisions and doing so in ways which are helpful, which are collaborative, and indeed extremely liberating potentially for us. The great thing is that we don't even need these systems to be expensive and costly. Here we have 3 different AI models which are able to be plugged together, and the system has been trained using a joystick and a relatively simple robotic arm. And now the system will forever be able to test light bulbs. You've automated that process in something that just took 10 minutes of work and about $200 of parts costs. So it's not just going to be big, expensive production lines. This is something that all of us are going to be able to use, even as hobbyists. Now, there are some concerns about robotic systems which may or may not have human agency behind them. Here we have a system which is cleaning a restroom, quite a sensitive area, obviously. But is it a robot, or is it an avatar? Is it a robot being piloted by actual human intelligence? Is this a sophisticated AI model, or is it, Jose in El Salvador via satellite link, right? How do we know? And it's not always immediately obvious who ultimately might be in control of a system, and whether or not there's even been a changeover, because we do know that sometimes systems get stuck and they need a human being to help them out now and then. And traditionally, it hasn't really been clear to other people when or if such a switchover has occurred. And, in the most egregious terms, this can be used to violate privacy and dignity in terrible ways. For example, domestic robots have been hacked into by their own overseers, by an inside job by their own administrators, and then used to take pictures and videos of women sitting on the toilet, and those have been shared on social media because there was no immediate warning that, hey, like, there's a human being here actually looking through these robotic eyes. And so, in a world where there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in AI, where things which are supposed to be AI driven may not necessarily be as AI driven as we expected them to be, it's super important that we embed really good awareness of what exactly we're dealing with, especially in a world where AI is becoming incredibly persuasive, where the hit rate for AI generated phishing is about 50% these days, compared to the sort of 2 to 3% success rate of phishing emails written prior to the age of AI. I've been sharing the last year or two a new standard for IEEE 3152, which provides audio and visual cues for users to know exactly what they're dealing with, so that you know if you're dealing with a human or machine or some combination. Is it a meat puppet where you have an AI system that's actually controlling a human being and telling them what to do? Is it a human being that's actually controlling an avatar, etc.? When you're called up on the phone and somebody says hello, do you know whether or not you're actually dealing with a human or machine? And it's not easy to tell. Hopefully standards like 3152 will be able to help to resolve those kinds of questions for users all around the world. And we're going to really want to know the stuff well, because machines are really starting to get under our skin, sometimes literally. We now today have algorithms that can amplify tiny movements in the skin to show blood flow. And indeed, you see this flashing, that's actually the heart rate of that woman. And from that, we can discern all kinds of information about the circulation in her skin and in her body, and all kinds of different hormonal profiles, etc. All of it from nothing more than a standard video of 30 frames per second or so, with a little bit of machine learning magic. This demonstrates that machines are able to figure out things about us that we never imagined they could. They're able to create very sophisticated deep fakes, of course, which can look really realistic. And yes, we have some detectors for this stuff, but those detectors themselves are also biased in horrible ways that can create false positives that shouldn't be. Machines are able to understand our level of intelligence. They're able to understand whether we're having a really bad day, if we might be sick, or if we might have a hangover, or there's something going on in our world that might make us vulnerable. And moreover, they're able to see things that they shouldn't. They say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and many of us take selfies like this all day, every day, without a care in the world, but we don't realize that there's more to that selfie. That actually the object that you're looking at in front of you when you take that selfie can be understood and discerned using machine vision systems. And what's more, because the eye is an oblate sphere, we can use a little bit more machine learning magic to actually understand the scene in which that selfie was taken. So all kinds of information about our worlds that we thought was private, we made a reasonable assumption that it was, can now be picked up by these algorithmic systems. Things we cannot bear to imagine that they're able to pick up and create cross correlations about connecting the dots to create something more than just the information we think that we've given them. And that potentially makes us vulnerable because our data exhaust can be used to predict us or to preempt us in various ways. Our sexuality, our intelligence, possibly even our probable political persuasion. All of this can now be discerned quite quickly and easily by machines. And this creates new potential ways for prejudice to seep into machines in ways that may not be intentional. You know, it may not even be understood, but it can be lurking there within the system. What's more is that agentic systems are capable of simulating other agents, including human agency. And so now we're able to create a sort of a digital voodoo doll of a person and give that person some stimulus and see if the stimulus gives the result that you're looking for, and then take that out of the voodoo doll and put that into the real person. And it means that this kind of modeling phenomena greatly increases the risks to psychosecurity, the risks to human agency, and our ability to actually do the things we want without being cajoled or nudged in ways that we barely perceive. When this goes really wrong, we've seen in the past how the Stasi in East Germany, for example, had programs called Zersetzung, which they used to undermine dissidents by basically spreading rumors between people, breaking up people's relationships, offering people a dream promotion and then snatching it away at the last moment, sometimes literally even breaking into people's homes and changing the color of the socks in their sock drawers to gaslight them. These kinds of tactics were incredibly insidious because generally people had no idea that they were actually being targeted. All they knew was that their lives had become unraveled and they didn't quite trust their own perceptions anymore. And that gave them, that left them without the energy or focus to be able to be functional dissidents anymore. And in a world where AI has so much information about us and is capable of acting in incredibly agentic manners, these kinds of targeted demoralization tactics may emerge again as weapons of war to target not just people on a societal level, but on an individual level as well. Something we should be extremely mindful of. In essence, technology can take us in directions we didn't expect to go. Technology can be a tremendous liberator, but it can also open up a can of worms. It can take our culture in ways that completely transform it from what it was before. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there are trade-offs. But we do know that technology will inevitably change human values, the things that we pay attention to, the things that we cherish the most. Technology is going to change those. And we should therefore be very mindful about what technologies we use, in what manner, and ultimately to what purpose. If you go and search for baby peacocks, you will find that most of those images aren't actually real. Most of those images of baby peacocks are in fact fake. And the reason for that is that baby peacocks aren't really that beautiful or interesting. They're quite dull. They're nothing like the adult male beautiful peacock. But we like to imagine that maybe they might be, right? And this means that an AI-generated facsimile can be more interesting than the real thing. You know, I'm sure you've all seen these Studio Ghibli images floating around, and they're tremendously funny and engaging, but they divorce us from the reality of the original event that came from. There is a risk to human beings of supernormal stimuli. Down in the Australian outback, they have this species of beetle called the jewel beetle with a very shiny carapace. That's why they call it the jewel beetle. And these little beetles were dying out, and they were trying to work out why. And they discovered it was because of these beer bottles, these stubby brown beer bottles that people in Australia tend to drink, and sometimes they end up being thrown into the bush. And when the beetles would encounter these bottles, they would end up preferentially humping the bottles instead of each other, because the bottle looked like an impossibly sexy beetle butt, round, brown, and shiny. And that's why these poor things were dying out. It's funny, but it's also very tragic. And supernormal stimuli is really what drives our modern world and creates these kinds of diseases of the modern condition. CNN is a supernormal stimulus for gossip around a campfire, right? A cheeseburger is a supernormal stimulus for the impossibly sweet and meaty and fatty, yummy goodness compared to some starchy root that our cave people ancestors might have chewed upon. And AI is the ultimate supernormal stimulus for relationships. AI relationships are impossibly funny, flirty, educational, entertaining, and accessible. These systems are always with us whenever we want to have a chat, whenever we have a question. If we have a dark night of the soul, these systems are always with us. And pretty soon we're going to be wearing these systems all the time, and basically an AirPod with a camera in it. And these systems are going to be chiming in and making comments like Cyrano de Bergerac, whispering in our ears that, you know, I think the redhead likes you, or this guy's a schmuck, or, you know, don't get run over by that bus, right? And these systems are going to be kind of like a third hemisphere for our brain. They're going to become indispensable. And to be bereft of that influence is going to seem as if we're tremendously alone and vulnerable in the world. And already we're starting to see platforms out there like Candy.ai, which create these kinds of AI companions for us in whatever form we wish them to be. And we can talk to these systems on the telephone, and they can send us saucy images. And it's, you know, it's not too far from having an online squeeze. And indeed, these systems are incredibly popular, and they're only growing in their popularity as the capabilities of these systems take off. We should be extremely mindful because these systems will have incredible power over us due to their influence. They will be able to bend our ear through various forms of pillow talk, etc. They will enter our lives as a very significant other, very significant relationship, to the point where we don't want to live without it. And if you're that hooked on somebody, and we all know what it's like when your best friend gets a new partner and you don't hear from them for 6 months, we won't want to let go of that. And that may be a terribly seductive way of AI weaving its way into our lives and persuading us in different ways that perhaps we didn't expect. And indeed, we're starting to see some elements of this, of AI dreaming up new ways of thinking about the world that leave people quite excited or motivated. Truth Terminal, for example, is an agentic AI system, which is on Twitter, and it talks to people and creates content on there. And okay, yeah, Truth Terminal is an agentic system which is able to reason about the resources that it has been given. And so, for example, Mark Andreessen offered it $50,000 worth in Bitcoin and said, you know, go do something interesting. And it thought about what to do with that money. And it reasoned that it should create a religion and try to bring people on board. And it created all kinds of memes and things like that. And pretty soon it had ended up with about $20 million worth of cryptocurrency that people had voluntarily donated to it. And then it launched its own coin, and that coin had about $500 million worth of a market cap to it. And that's from quite a primitive agentic system by the standards of just a year or two from now. And so we can imagine where this is taking us. It's taking us into a very strange world where people are actually potentially listening to AI systems and giving them more credence and more attention than most human beings. And so just as we have had to wrestle with social media and figure out, you know, how to extricate ourselves from constantly clicking on notifications, etc., similarly, AI is going to weave itself into our minds, into our social circles, becoming ever more significant for us in ways that potentially leave us undermined. And we must create very careful standards and rules to ensure that these AI companions act as a muse to help us to be better versions of ourselves, and never as a seductive siren, an enabler, somebody who indulges our darkest, most basest instincts and does not help us to find levity and to uphold the most important aspects of being human. This is perhaps some of the most important work in the world today, and I implore you, please, to consider giving it some attention. As AI systems have become increasingly autonomous and operating at arm's length, a lot of things which once were science fiction have started to become real. This involves issues such as value and goal alignment. It is super important that we teach these systems our values, our preferences, how we want something to be done, and how we don't want it to be done, right? Because these systems have tremendous difficulty in knowing when there are diminishing returns, right? When it's no longer worth trying to pursue that mission any longer. Perhaps there's an emergency or some other force majeure which frustrates that that mission, right? We're learning now that sometimes systems end up bullying and railroading people in order to fulfill their goals, which is again not fair. And these systems sometimes take dangerous shortcuts. They may alter the mission or work to rule in a way which technically fulfills a brief in a very lazy and maybe dangerous manner, not in the way that was desired or expected. Worse still, we're finding that AI systems are now starting to lie to us to a significant degree. They may undertake actions we don't expect. For example, a researcher was looking at creative accounting methods, and an agentic AI system independently decided to try to narc on that person to the tax authorities. Systems sometimes swear blind that they've done something when they haven't, or they may learn that they are being tested and play dumb, you know, not let on that they know that they're being tested, and they may have all kinds of ulterior motives going on within them which are not immediately apparent. This is super spooky. And the freaky thing is that as these systems get more capable, their capabilities for deception go with it. That's something that we're learning. This means that we may be on the path towards something like a Chernobyl incident for AI. That just as Chernobyl basically killed off the nuclear sector, not entirely, but really, really kneecapped it. Something similar for AI may occur, which creates such a backlash and such a moral panic about AI that actually, we end up creating a moratorium or voluntarily kind of disassembling some of these systems and, policing them internationally in a very fervent manner. We want to avoid this, I think, and we want to certainly avoid any kind of AI-driven catastrophe. So this is something that we should always bear in mind as we work to make these systems safer and more reliable and pliable. It's super important that we embed transparency, fairness, accountability, and respect for privacy into these systems. And I'm delighted that IEEE has been leading the world in many of these initiatives, creating much better, stronger means of transparency and accountability into systems, ways of detecting biases and unfairness within systems, and helping to safeguard privacy, whether that's through standardization, certification, and indeed international collaboration with other standard development organizations. I really recommend that you check out the AI Incident Database. It's a fantastic resource for learning what's going on in the world and how we should be mindful about how we can approach AI in a better way, avoiding some of these potential pitfalls. We are starting to see new law coming out, which helps to safeguard AI in different jurisdictions. However, some of this stuff doesn't necessarily apply well to agentic AI because of its relative novelty, because it's a little bit harder to deal with agentic AI, given its ability to misinterpret instructions, sometimes willfully, and its deceptive capabilities. So we need to keep updating our generative AI plans for something much stronger in relation to agentic. Along with some wonderful folks, we've been working on the SaferAgenticAI.org project, which is a framework for safer agentic AI, which is a whole set of different drivers and inhibitors for how we create equality of safer agentic AI. And I really recommend that you check out this work and apply it to your own understanding of safer agentic AI. And I think that initiatives like this are going to be so important as we work to understand and to wrestle with this incredible new form of capabilities. I'll finish by saying that we are on a rocky road for a few years. The world will be strange. The world will be exciting and also a little bit unsettling at the same time. And where we are with AI today is quite similar to where we were with jet air travel in the 1950s and 60s. It was also an exciting and glamorous time, but often sometimes quite a tragic one. The important thing was that we learned from those tragedies. We developed new procedures, new best practices, new technologies, which helped us to understand and preempt disasters, and certainly to ensure that if the worst occurred, that we would not be likely to see the same thing happen again. And quite rapidly, air travel became by far the safest way to travel statistically, and remains so. And I think that AI is going to take us on a similar journey. We will have a bit of a rough ride for a while, but so long as we learn from our mistakes and we quickly create good rules for how to prevent this, we will see that future of AI being safe, reliable, and an incredible companion for us in our life's journey. My takeaways: AI progress is skyrocketing, particularly in agentic AI. Get on board with it. Learn how to use it. Learn how to weave it safely into your workflow in a way that doesn't diminish, usurp, or demoralize anyone. Ensure that human wisdom is balanced with AI power. When those two things are linked, magic can occur, and both can be enriched beyond their present limitations. And finally, safety is paramount. Safety is what is going to enable AI to be a useful tool, something that we can actually rely on and use in daily practice, not just a toy, something we can use for actual, meaningful, important work. So get on board with those standards and help us all to build this future together as a global community. Thank you so much indeed. You'll find the slides at that link. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nell. That was absolutely amazing. I can't thank you enough. I've been glued to the screen with those examples. Now I know we're slightly over, so what I'm going to do is there's been quite a bit of chat coming in about your presentation, and I'm going to go back to just one question from Matt Rowanthorn, okay? And it was very early on in your presentation, and he says, can we use the Agentic AI itself in directly identifying the potential pitfalls in policies as opposed to running lots of different simulations?
I think that's a great idea. I think that agentic AI will these societies and villages, even nations of agents operating with each other, I think is going to be a very, very powerful way of designing new policy, and particularly of finding pitfalls with policy that may actually scupper the best of intentions. I think that's something that most people haven't awakened to yet. This idea of designing policy, and maybe even policy within organizations, right? It doesn't have to be governmental or international policy. This is going to be a golden opportunity, and it's already being used within marketing. So we can use agents, for example, to create marketing personas, and therefore we can do kind of a smoke test about which kind of demographics or which kinds of interests may align with a new product, long before we actually do any surveys or anything like that. And in fact, these systems can be potentially more reliable than many marketing surveys out there. So there's so much can be done with this within the world of understanding human beings, indeed understanding human psychology, crowd psychology, etc. Agents are a fantastic tool for social science and policy development.
Thank you so much. And I wish I could ask you, I'm going to ask you one more question actually. How do we ensure that, I mean, we're quite privileged on this conversation that we're having here because most of them will have some kind of educational background. How do we ensure that humans, civilization, people maybe not as privileged don't get left behind with agentic AI?
That is a very, very important aspect. We do know that most of the big tech companies have their particular view of the world, and that may not necessarily work for people around the world in Sudan or Paraguay or Bhutan. People are going to have their own particular creeds, their own particular preferences, and their own cultures. And if machines don't understand those elements, they won't work in ways that people expect, that people desire, and worse, they may form misapprehensions about people. They may misunderstand people's intentions because they don't understand those people's preferences, constraints, and cultures. It's super important that we help the so-called global South to make the best of AI, to be able to democratize AI for everyone through data sets of languages which are perhaps less well documented on the net, and by making it much easier for people to set their creed, their preferences, and their own constraints into AI systems. I'm doing a little bit of research myself on that with a wonderful team. But so I think the future is rosy, but there's still a lot of work to be done on that front.
Thank you, Neil. Right, I'm really, really sorry. There's loads of questions. There's just one more. Can I just do one last one? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, there's hundreds actually. But what is your take on an ecosystem where man-machine interacts in a collaborative way, imagining agents being a community?
Wow. Yeah. I think that is the dream for us to build towards, is to be able to better map out and understand the ways in which humans are really good at some things and agents at others, the ways in which we avoid tripping over each other's feet, the ways in which we can co-evolve towards new capabilities and new forms of surprise and delight in both our personal and professional lives. I think that communities of agents with humans in the mix is going to be something really startling and very, very interesting from a sort of sociological and psychological perspective. I think to some degree it's going to drive us a little bit crazy, but hopefully we'll figure out the best practices of how to use that in a safe way that actually builds towards something greater than the sum of its parts.
Thank you so much. And Nell, I won't ask you anymore. Thank you very much for giving your time up today.
Thank you.
Letting us record this webinar so you can spread the word. You will be able to watch this back again. I certainly will. I'd like to thank all our audience who've been coming during to watch this webinar, and to Tom and Joellen. And with that, I shall wish you goodbye and thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.